So good evening. I'm Arnie Eisen, the Chancellor of JTS, and I want to welcome you to this evening's program. We're here to celebrate the recent publication of an extremely thoughtful and wise and passionate and relevant and exceptionally useful and user-friendly book, Eli Confer's Empowered Judaism. I love the subtitle. I'll talk about user-friendly, what independent minyanim can teach us about building vibrant Jewish communities. And let me say before I go any farther that the book will be available for sale in the lobby outside at the conclusion of the program, and the author, I'm told, will be happy to autograph the copies that are sold. We, at JTS, we take special pride in this evening's program because the author, Eli Confer, Rabbi Eli Confer, is a graduate of the JTS Rabbinical School, is currently pursuing a DHL at JTS, has been shaped in formative ways by his time at JTS, and now through thinking, such as the ideas expressed in this book, and the new sorts of institutions he's helping to create on the ground, is having an impact in turn on the way we educate future rabbis and other Jewish leaders at JTS. You heard the words building vibrant Jewish communities in the subtitle of Empowered Judaism. Building vibrant Jewish communities, making those communities into committed vehicles for transformation of Jewish life, for transmission of meaning, as I put it, with a capital M. In a more traditional word, making them vehicles for Torah, is, I think, the task of this and any other time for Jews. And the fact that the Jewish people and Judaism still survive and thrive after some 2,500 years is proof of the success we've had in the past in performing this dual task, creating community, transmitting meaning, with a great deal of success. I regard it as our job here to gather together resources of learning in the books, in the faculty, in the students, and to bring those resources to bear for the benefit of Judaism and the Jewish people, to put out a vision of the Jewish future based authentically on the Jewish past, and to imbue future Jewish leaders with that vision of the Jewish past, with that learning, so that they go forth in this place knowing what it is to create vibrant Jewish communities that give people meaning with a capital M. I think that JTS has done this now for over a century, and as we go forward into the 21st century, we are rededicating ourselves to doing this with even greater intensity. I'm proud of the innovative character that JTS has had throughout its history, and I'm not sure that innovation has often been a word associated in the public mind with JTS, but consider the fact that Schechter was brought here and came here because the same group of far-sighted Jews that founded a host of other institutions, including the Jewish Publication Society, the Jewish Encyclopedia, the American Jewish Historical Society, realized that a new kind of Judaism was necessary for the new continent in the new century, that that new kind of Judaism required a new sort of Jewish leader. And think again of the World War II era when Finkelstein, faced with the reality of the Shoah and then the creation of the State of Israel, recognized that America was soon to be the most powerful Jewish community on the planet, and that new sorts of leaders were required for this new sort of environment in which Jews could thrive. And therefore, Finkelstein innovated programs like Camp Ramah, like the Jewish Museum, like the Eternal Light program in radio and television, like the first interfaith gatherings of the dimension they took on at JTS, et cetera, et cetera. I like to think that we're now, as it were, at a third great moment, a century after Schechter, 50 or 60 years after Finkelstein, when it's clear beyond the shadow of a doubt that this Jewish community is facing unprecedented challenges, facing them alongside the wonderful reality of the State of Israel, which is also facing unprecedented challenges. And the question is, what are we going to do to meet these challenges? What sorts of synthesis of combination, what sort of synthesis of innovation and continuity are we going to devise out of our learning and our experience to meet these new challenges? And I'm proud that the leadership of Hadar features prominently JTS graduates, notably Ellie Confer. I'm proud that Sharon Brous, the founding leader of ECAR in Los Angeles, is a JTS graduate. I'm proud that Rachel Nussbaum, the founding leader of Kavanah in Seattle, is a JTS graduate, and the list could go on. That at this moment in American Jewish life, JTS graduates are taking the lead in pioneering new moments in the development of vibrant Jewish community in our country and in the world. I'm going to sit down in one moment and join a distinguished panel, which is here to lead us in considering the implications of Ellie Confer's book. I'll introduce our panelists in turn. First, we'll hear from the author of Ellie Confer's book, Rabbi Ellie Confer, named one of Newsweek's top 50 rabbis in 2009. Rabbi Confer is co-founder and executive director of Machon Hadar, an institute that empowers Jews to build vibrant Jewish communities. He also teaches Talmud at Yeshivat Hadar, the first full-time egalitarian yeshiva program in North America. He co-founded Kilat Hadar, an independent minyan in Manhattan, committed to spirited traditional prayer, study, and social action, and Ellie was ordained at JTS in 2007. On Ellie's left, Rabbi Ayelet S. Cohen, who has served as a rabbi at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, CBST, in Manhattan since 2002, following her ordination at JTS. And passionately committed to progressive and feminist Judaism, she is an activist and an advocate for full inclusion and celebration of LGBT Jews in the conservative movement and the larger Jewish world. Rabbi Cohen lectures and facilitates university, synagogue, and other Jewish and interfaith groups, and Jewish, feminist, and gay and lesbian issues. She's been profiled in the New York Times, was named one of the Heb 100 by Heb magazine, the 100 people you need to know about. And this evening, you get a chance to know her a little better. On my right, Professor Stephen Cohen, who just handed me a new bio before I walked on here, and now I have misplaced this new bio, which Steve handed me. Here it is. Stephen Cohen, a sociologist of American Jewry, is research professor of Jewish social policy at HUC-JIR and director of the Berman Jewish Policy Archive at NYU Wagner. In 1992, he made Aliyah and taught for 14 years at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Previously, he taught at Queens College with visiting appointments at Yale, at Brandeis, and at JTS. And among his many well-known publications, we'll mention just one.
You just did. It's enough. Amazing, even.
The Jew Within, co-authored with the current chancellor of JTS. And with that, I'll sit down and we'll begin the program. And the form that's going to take is I'm going to ask Ellie a couple questions, then turn to Ayelet, then turn to Steve. We'll have a little follow-up here, and then we will throw the floor open to discussion from all of you. So, Ellie, it was moving to me when I read your book to read about the formation of Kilat Hadar and how, in turn, the reality of Hadar formed you and inspired you, heart and mind and soul. You say near the beginning of this book, in fact, I have a short quotation I wanted to read from page 4, where you say, the vision for an empowered Judaism is ultimately much larger than any particular independent minyan, but visions are inspired by lived communities. That's always been my experience. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, what was driving you? What did you hope to accomplish when you set out with others to found Kilat Hadar? What surprised you that so had an impact upon you, and how does your wonderful book grow out of the lived community of Kilat Hadar? And welcome to JTS. That's a silly thing to say, Ellie Confer. Welcome home.
First of all, I want to start with a thank you. I could spend the rest of the time thanking people, many people in this room. It's obvious to me, and I want to make it absolutely clear, that anything that we've done with independent minyanim, that I've done personally in my life, is only possible due to the the shoulders of the giants that I'm standing upon, a host of institutions, some beyond JTS, and starting with my own schooling that my parents founded, a school that I went to in Providence for 9 years. The experience of my life, which you could read about in that first chapter, took me through a number of different experiences and institutions, all of which I owe a debt of gratitude to. But mostly I owe a debt of gratitude towards the people who I created relationships with when I was in all these places. And I'm extremely privileged to have a number of teachers and chavrutas and students in the room here tonight, and to just acknowledge that and be very thankful for that. I also want to say specifically that it's an incredible honor to be sitting here. I said when I walked into the room, I didn't know that that table could move, but apparently it can, and it's really an honor to be at this panel with my distinguished colleagues to my left and to my right. To answer your question, Chancellor Eisen, I think that part of the power of Hadar, which when it started was not Hadar, it was not anything, it was just a group of people who got together in someone's apartment on the 10th floor. The power in the beginning really was a simple vision combined with an ability to execute that vision. I think it's always come back to that. The simple vision in this case was a vision for an engaged, traditional, egalitarian davening. This is not innovative in certain ways. In certain ways, it's as old as Judaism is itself, although the combination is certainly new. But I think that the focus on what it means to have an engaged, traditional, egalitarian davening was the issue that we were playing with back in 2001. When you see in the book, I think you can't, what does it mean when I say engaged? I want to be engaged too. So why isn't everybody engaged? Well, I think it comes down to some of the details. And I think some of the details that we were playing out in that moment, in that room, and as it grew out, were very specific. What does it mean to be engaged with prayer? I think, first of all, it means taking seriously the possibility that prayer means something, that prayer can change you, that prayer is not just a precursor to Kiddush, that prayer is actually something that is something deep and worth exploring and getting to relate to. With that vision in mind, how do you execute it? We had our own approach, and I think what you'll see when you read the book and the different voices in the book is the ways in which Independent Minyanim took that vision in very different ways, what it means to have an engaged davening. The particular vision that we had was one that was a participatory service. Simple innovations like putting the prayer leader in the middle, which is obviously not an innovation, but a return to tradition. Having a room that fits the size of the number of people who show up. Having an acoustically pleasurable room. Having a sense of time. What would it mean if the Devar Torah was limited to 5 minutes? And all of those details added up, I think, to an engaged, egalitarian, traditional davening. I think the other aspect was execution. It's good to have a vision, and it's good to know, all right, we want the guy who's davening or the woman who's davening to be in the middle. And then how do you actually make it happen? I had with me an incredible group of volunteer leaders. And I should say at that time, I was not thinking about going to rabbinical school. I knew because my father was a rabbi, I was not going to rabbinical school. In many ways, it was an opportunity for me at the time, a corporate fraud investigator, to play out what it means to be a lay Jew who's engaged with a serious spiritual life, although it's not their profession. And all the people who were involved with us in those early years had a similar relationship, some of them who are here tonight. We had an incredible group of people who were putting this together. It was a group of people that met for 3 hours once a week. You're like, so all we were doing was davening. What were we talking about? But there was a lot of specific focus on the details that we did in those 3 hours. we had a sense of humor about it. We didn't think it was the most important thing in the world, and we were constantly firing each other even though we weren't employed. And there was a sense that, you know, if things were going bad, we could just pull the plug and shut it down. And I think there was some lightheartedness that allowed this, which obviously deep down I felt was very serious, but that lighthearted approach also was significant. You know, we were always scouting for new people. It was, I think you asked what's surprising. What was surprising to me is that there were people beyond all the people that I already knew who were interested in coming and interested in leading and interested in contributing to the community. And that was only as a result of scouting. We scouted people and you know, we would listen to them daven and go up to them afterwards and say, you know, can you read off Torah next week or whatever it is. I think that's because we wanted to draw in the widest circle of people that we possibly could who were engaged in this vision. And finally, we had this culture of gratitude. I think that the amazing thing about a volunteer community, which is that everybody's doing it because they want to. No one was telling us to do this. And there was a lot of currency in thanking people when they did stuff. So we thanked people all the time. And I think it created a culture of gratitude that, you know, I think lives on till today in many of the independent minyanim. So I'll stop there.
Let me ask one follow-up question, Ellie. Skipping from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that there's a major concern or pitch or argument that you put in front of your readers about either the one thing needed for the American Jewish community to thrive, or certainly one of the two major things that is needed for the Jewish community to thrive on this continent, and that is the need for an educated laity. And I wanted to talk to you about your concern. Why does this matter so much? Why does so much else depend upon this, including the passionate davening that you have found transformative and so many other people have found transformative at Hadar? And do you think we have any chance of achieving this in any widespread form?
I think you're right to characterize the issue of an educated laity as the issue that I view as the most pressing issue in American Jewish life today. Because in some ways, the independent minyanim, you like them, you don't like them, they were started by people who had the confidence, knowledge, and skills to do something on their own that for many people has been incredibly meaningful. And I think the real question that I was left with after years of engaging in the minyan was, how could we foster an educated laity? I'm obviously not the first person to think about this, but how could we foster an educated laity that would do whatever they're going to do? You know, whether it's start a minyan or become part of a synagogue or both or something that we haven't even thought of yet. I think that's the key. And you need a critical mass to do that. You know, a minyan's not one person. A minyan is a group of people. And, you know, I think you asked whether this is possible. I think that's where I start to get a little nervous. Stephen Cohen, I'm sure, will talk about the ways in which he has nervousness and fears for the future of American Jewry. I also am very nervous and fearful, although not necessarily in the same frame. I think that my fear stems from I look out and I see that Torah is often in the service of continuity, and the question is, could continuity be in the service of Torah? I think that one of the bravest things that I ever heard was Chancellor Eisen say at the amazing celebration of John Risque's decade of service at UJA Federation, talking about Torah as a centerpiece for looking forward. And I see a great ally with you and so many people in this room about putting Torah as not a vehicle towards continuity, but there's a reason for us to continue, and it's embodied in the Torah that the Jewish people has inherited and will pass on. But if you look out in the world today, I think the state of affairs indicates that we don't really believe that Torah is valuable. If we did, things would look totally different. We believe that algebra is valuable or Shakespeare is valuable, but we don't deep down believe that Torah is valuable, otherwise things would look different. And obviously the people in this room, I don't need to convince you, but I'm saying we as, generally. And the question is, what could change that? Well, I think that the good news is there's a real opportunity here. As I see it, We started, as you mentioned in the introduction, the first egalitarian yeshiva in North America. And I think the reason that we did that was because there's a demand for it. People want to engage in meaningful, traditional understandings of the wisdom that we inherited. They want it. They don't necessarily have the language for it all the time, but they want to experience meaning, and they want to have some value and purpose to their lives. And thank God the Jewish people have a tool for that. It's the study of Torah. So I think that the demand is high, and the question is, can we take advantage of the population that is really playing in the arena of the independent minyanim, that is people who are post-college, pre-marriage and kids, to say we have an opportunity for people who are thirsting for meaning, who have time to give, and what are the institutions and the avenues, the multiple institutions and avenues that we need to create to really foreground an opportunity to engage with the substance of the Jewish tradition. That's what I'm banking on. Otherwise, I'm going back to corporate fraud investigating, of which there's a lot to do. But I stand here tonight basically saying, let's all come together and see if we can pull this off, because I think it would be a crime not to be able to at least give it a try.
So, Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, we asked you to be here to demonstrate in your person the creativity, the leadership, the innovation, the continuity that is happening not just in the independent minyanim, but in synagogues throughout this country. God knows there's a certain amount of mediocrity and repetitiveness and dullness and routine, but from my travels around the country, I also see a great deal of excellence and a great deal of innovation. So what we wanted you to reflect on, first of all, is how are the dilemmas that you've faced in a synagogue like CBST, like and not like those that Eli Confer describes in this book? How much of what Eli outlines in Empowered Judaism is applicable to shuls from your experience, and what would the differences be between shuls and independent minyanim?
First, I really want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here as someone who grew up in the Chavurah movement and really sees myself as a product of that, and then ended up on what for me felt like an extremely unlikely trajectory of ending up as a congregational rabbi. I feel like this is a topic which has great resonance for me. As a child, the weeks that our Chavurah met were fun and exciting, and the davening was joyful and engaging, and we were surrounded by people who we loved and were excited to be around. And I remember as a child being excited to be old enough to get to participate in leading davening and participating in that way. And the weeks that the Chavurah didn't meet were the boring weeks where we went to the big shul, which was very alienating and very long and very difficult. I think ultimately, though, the problem isn't synagogues. The problem is entrenchment in old patterns. The problem is a lack of vision. And unfortunately, there is no lack of synagogues out there and rabbis out there who suffer from that. But there are also many who do not and who are eager to engage and to be exciting, joyful places. I think that many of the strategies that you describe, Ellie, in the book are very, very much relevant and replicable in shuls that are open to engaging in that process. The idea of really being thoughtful about the physical space, about how we set up the chairs, about where the person who's leading davening stands or sits, and not feeling trapped to a pre-existing structure of a room is absolutely relevant. I think that really understanding that having an engaged laity and an educated laity is essential. Absolutely. I think that thinking about prayer, really understanding that liturgy and the experience of prayer for so many Jews is the first point of contact with the synagogue community and with an active Jewish life. And therefore, for that experience to be emotionally moving and intellectually challenging and spiritually uplifting is so important. And therefore, we absolutely need to spend a tremendous amount of energy thinking about the centrality of prayer, thinking about how we shape our liturgy and our experience of davening, about who in the community should be leading prayer and what they should be conveying by their presence. All of those are extremely important, and I think absolutely within the reach of synagogues and other institutions to think about that. I think there are many advantages of independent minyanim. I think that it's easier not to have an existing culture that needs to be changed. And it's a great challenge to come into an existing culture and try to move things around. I think the other thing that you mentioned is, what does it mean to be in a community when everybody is actively choosing to be there? That nobody is there because it's the expected thing, nobody is there because it's automatic, nobody is there because you're supposed to dress up and look nice and appear in a certain way in a certain place on Shabbat. And I feel that that's actually been one of the great blessings of being in my community at CBST, which is very much a community of choice, of people who don't feel like they have to go to shul, but as people who primarily are of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender experience, are seeking out as adults a thoughtful and engaging and meaningful Jewish experience. And so they want to be there, and they want to engage, and they want to daven, and they want to learn. And it's such a treat, it's such a gift to get to be in that kind of room. I think the question of whether or not for a prayer community to define itself as a synagogue or not is a really interesting question. I think for CBST, when it was founded in 1973, the very beginning of the gay rights movement, when it was just occurring to people that it was possible to be openly gay and actively Jewish at the same time, the establishment of a synagogue was very significant because it came with a claim of authenticity that was extremely important. And I think that's an important piece because I think for so many Jews, the search for home in Jewish community is about that sense of seeking authenticity and that deep fear that so many of us have that we're not really authentically Jewish, that someone else knows more than we do, that has more of a right than we do. And so I think that achieving among any group of Jews, any group of laity, a sense that each of us has the right and the ability to become fluent in Jewish texts, that each of us has access and deserves to claim ownership of the Jewish canon is essential. I mean, this is something I think about all of the time in my teaching at CBST, and some of the most meaningful experiences I've had as a rabbi are with my students towards conversion to Judaism or in our adult B'nai Mitzvah program, and some of the graduates are in this room, that and I always say at the beginning, what I want you to feel at the end of this program is that Judaism belongs to you, and that you have the right and the access and the ability to open any Jewish book and figure it out, and know that it doesn't belong to someone else, and no one else has a greater claim to it because it belongs to all of us. And that process is going to take a different shape in different places, and I think it's essential to really think about who is in the room and how we're honoring their experiences and their difference and really speaking to that, and also letting ourselves be flexible, which I think is one of the challenges of an ongoing institution, is to have that flexibility. But I really think these ideas of engaged Judaism and empowered Judaism and institutional Judaism are not in competition with each other. I think they can absolutely enhance each other and become great blessings to each other.
So, Ayelet, one of the differences in who is in the room has to do with the age of the people in the room. So I think I speak for Steve that we lately have the experience that in many of the rooms we want to be in, we're the oldest people in those rooms. And it's a kind of asymmetry here that younger people prefer to be with younger people. Older people also prefer to be with younger people.
And younger people like to be with us.
Maybe. So we like to think that one of the strengths of synagogues is the diversity of many sorts in those rooms, particularly the diversity of generation. But let's be frank and say there's also weaknesses built into this diversity. There are differences in aesthetic sensibilities. There are differences in people's prayer styles, differences in what they want in terms of social action, spirituality, etc. So how do you think this dynamic of generational variety versus homogeneity plays itself out in the synagogue today?
I think that's a really important point. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are not actively seeking out encounters with people of different generations and are not and don't see generational heterogeneity as a value or as a goal. In fact, I think a lot of people in that age group see it as very fun and liberating to be nowhere near their parents' synagogue and to be doing something else. And I think it's important to be able to name that. I think that in a more heterogeneous setting, there is the opportunity for incredible, incredible learning and for spiritual growth. I think to be in a community with people who are of profoundly different experience, whether that's age or stage of life or economic situation or sexual orientation, expands us as human beings and expands us as Jews. And it's very difficult to tell someone that experience will be exciting for them. And you talk a lot in the book about how much the independent minyan communities often are constantly evolving and people kind of age out of them. And then the interesting question also ends up being, where do they go? And I think if we can create an appetite in them for having Shabbat as a major piece of their life, for having satisfying prayer as an essential piece of their being, then they're going to look for something when they are priced out of Manhattan or age out of a certain stage, and then I think can become a part of these extremely rich communities. I think that part of it also has to do with how much the focus can be on the present in that age and stage, and one of the things that you reference is what to do about life cycle events and pastoral needs, and that in some ways when people aren't thinking about things like hospitalizations and funerals and what their needs are going to be in those moments, the things that they're looking for in a spiritual community can be a little bit different. And so unfortunately, I think those kinds of traumatic experiences can mature younger people into a place of appreciating and understanding the need for a more heterogeneous community in that sense. I think the other piece which is connected is the question of belonging. And I think for so many of us as Jews, as human beings in the world, we just want to belong somewhere. We have this profound need and desire to belong. And it can seem easier to belong in a room where everyone seems like they're just like us, where they're similar to our age or similar to our stage. And we also talk a lot about the phenomenon right now about the resistance to joining, to becoming a member of something. And I think it's an interesting dichotomy, how much people have this longing to belong and yet this resistance to joining something as a member. And I think when people come to really appreciate what a community can offer and what they have to offer and realize that their presence is a gift to a community, then something very profound can be achieved. I think that so many Jews are in a deeply vulnerable place when we walk into a shul or a spiritual community for the first time, and we're so much in need of welcome. And that sometimes people at different stages of life are going to be more attuned to that, not always, but I think that there's great possibility within that.
Thank you. So in introducing Steve Cohen, let me say that this evening is co-sponsored by the Berman Policy Archive of NYU, of which Steve is the director, yes? Steve, we thought that you would help us now take the lens even larger. Let's get a bigger picture. How is the American Jewish community changing before our eyes? And in particular, how are the Jews changing by age cohort? What's different now than it was before? And how are the people Ellie's age and Ayelet's age, and then the people younger than them, different than the people our age and the people older than our age? Do we really see cohort differences now in the population? Where are we moving?
Well, thank you. I'll take some. You didn't give me a chance to say nice things about Ellie's book, so. No, all right, we'll get to it. So just for the record, it's really a worthwhile book to read. I recommend it, and we'll get back to it. But I'll try to stay on topic and to be concise. There are two major factors going on in American Jewish life. One is if you look at the American Jewish population, it's polarizing, and the second, if you look at the center of the population, it's moving from an identity of affiliation and belonging to an identity of meaning and purpose. So now let me briefly explain my first observation and somewhat longer explain the second observation. First observation, if you look at American Jewry, just like Julius Caesar said all Gaul can be divided into three parts, all American Jewry can also be divided into three parts. The Orthodox, the highly unengaged Jews who are heavily fueled by the children of intermarried, well, not all children of the intermarried, and everybody else in between. Demographically, the two wings are growing, and the middle wing, or the middle segment, is in sharp decline. Sitting in this building, the fount of, what is it, the fount of Judaism, conservative Judaism?
Just say conservative Judaism.
Conservative Judaism. Sitting in this building, I know that we are conscious of the declines in demography of conservative Judaism. The signs are all over. They've been over for a long time. We should also know that there are significant numerical declines in the number of adult Reform Jews that are masked by the large number of intermarriages. Statistically, as we have more intermarriage, we have fewer, and we have the same number of worshipers, same number of members. It means that there are fewer adult Reform Jews. Ellie, I know that you and I were sitting next to each other at American Jewish Committee, AJC meeting, and I said, well, why aren't you worried about intermarriage? And he said, all right, well, show me. So I said, well, look, among the Orthodox, there are 100 Orthodox Jews, our age. There are 192 Orthodox Jews that age. And among 100 non-Orthodox Jews our age, there are, and I said, what if there were 90? Would you worry? And he said, well, how about 80? Would you worry? How about 70? And then you said, oh, I know this Parsha. And the truth is, at least in the 2001, I think it's gotten even more severe, 2001 NJPS, when I did the analysis, I found 55 non-Orthodox Jews. I see Adam and Debbie back there, and I worry about Yair and Rafi living in Teaneck. Will Yair and Rafi have non-Orthodox engaged Jews to build communities with? I'm concerned about that. It's a real thing. Plus, I care about every Jew. I care about those Jews aren't, a lot of Jews aren't Jewish. So let's understand that. That's one part of there's this polarization of sorts. Within this middle that now exists, what's going on in the transition from one generation to the other, I mentioned is the movement from identity of belonging to an identity of purpose and meaning. Not you personally, but your generation is saying to our generation, the three I's, Israel, in marriage, and institutions, are no longer in and of themselves meaningful. They no longer command automatic loyalty. They do insofar as they connect it to higher Jewish purpose. It could be high-quality davening, making the world a better place, high-level education, and caring communities and all that. It's possible you can make one type of marital choice or another. It's possible you don't have to belong. It's possible that you say Israel is not deserving of my support unless it measures up to my values. So that's what's happening right now. There's a movement towards identity, this identity of meaning and purpose, which explains a lot of the trends that we're seeing. And now our response as a Jewish community has to be neither one nor the other. Neither digging in our heels and saying, that's why they should join suburban conservative synagogues. They should all marry Jews and join and give the Federation and what else? You could go down the list and support the state of Israel, right or wrong. Nor does it mean we say we only do things that have meaning and purpose, so forth and so on. We need, Peter Berger said that there are three options when you're dealing with modernity. One option is called the deductive option, which is hold the fort, deduce your old principles. The other is the reductive option, which basically means surrender. Just give up, whatever it is, we'll go running after the market. Neither option actually works. The deductive option, sticking with mission, drives away people to say, fine, you could go off and be a sect. The reductive option means that we really have no principles. We're just going to follow the masses wherever they go. So we need, and this is where we come around to what both you guys are doing, I think all of us are doing, we need the inductive option, the inventive option, that says, yes, we're going to be loyal to mission, and we're going to be market relevant. And the only way to do that is by creating something which is both new and continuous at the same time. And that's what in experiencing Hadar personally, and knowing about your work, I see that as the essence of what you're doing, and we're all trying, we're all inventing. Everything that we invent, so the last point I want to make, everything that we invent, I don't know if it's true about other groups, but Jews are inveterate critics. I feel like the reaction to your joke, the reaction to you is the old joke. Unfortunately, it's made about Jewish mothers, but my Jewish fathers too. It's the red tie, blue tie joke. I'm glad you and I have neither. And that the mother gives the son two ties, a red tie and a blue tie. So next Shabbos, son comes, he's wearing the blue tie. She goes, "What's the matter? The red tie wasn't good enough for you." So when you found independent meaning, they go, "Oh, what's the matter? Suburban synagogues are no good. You forgot about Camp Ramah. You forgot about Shechter. And what do you think about Israel? And what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And he's saying, "Look, I'm doing my best. I'm trying to do this." That's true. But now, and this is the interesting thing, now that you're sitting where you're sitting, and now that the book is out, and now that there's 60 plus minyanim, and now that there's a symbolic leadership, now, this is the time when we have to go bigger. When all of us are looking for leadership, and all of us are saying, okay, you dealt with this, there's a lot of work to be done. We have other questions. We have bigger questions. We do have questions about intermarriage. We do have questions about Israel. And we do have questions about gays and lesbians and sexual orientation. And we do have questions about Tikkun Olam. And how are we going to address those questions? Because since those are the questions, and thankfully you and your friends have taken leadership, we want you to be part of the discourse. And this is the last point. This is the first time in Jewish history that 4 generations are exercising Jewish leadership. Morty, I hope you don't mind. I use Bill Berman's 92. So when I talk about my staff, I talk about my staff who's 22. I happen to know you're a little older, but it rhymes better. So I like to say I have a donor who's 92 and staff who's 22. Excuse me. But it means, back to generational, it means that for the first time in Jewish history, that, since thank God we're all living longer and healthier, and may it be for all of us, we're going to have people who are exercising leadership into the 70s, 80s, 90s, while people are also exercising leadership in the 20s at the same time. And now we're going to look forward to a future when we're going to have 4 generations, and thank God we're all stuck with each other, and for a long time, God willing, and we're going to have to engage in this dialogue for many, many, many years to come.
So, Ellie, I, of course, have my fill of follow-up questions here, but I imagine you're sitting here wanting to comment on what Ayelet and Steve have just said, yes or no? Well, okay, so you asked for it. I had the experience of participating in a Wexner graduate fellowship seminar where Ellie Confer led the group in bowing down on hands and knees, and falling koreh, and really mishtachavim the way it was meant to be done. I'm not going to ask you to specifically talk about that action or that experience, but it said something to me, and I think it's a subject that we should not slight when talking about the meaning of Kilat Hadar, Machon Hadar, this entire movement that we're talking about, which is the heightened experience of God. You know, when Steve and I wrote The Jew Within, we had the experience of asking people after we had interviewed them for 3 or 4 hours, is there anything you'd like to talk more about? And almost invariably, they said they wanted to talk about God. And the statistic which most astonished me in the survey data that we compiled for the Jew Within was the high number of Jews who said they believe in God and pray to God on a regular basis, not asking them how they define this God, but this is something that people want. And we often use this word spirituality, and it's a buzzword, but partly it's a word to get around the difficulty of actually talking about harder words like faith and God. And one of the things that fuels the success, I think, of Hadar is the willingness to talk about God and put a premium on encountering God and talk about religious experience. And I wanted you to just say a few words about what you have found in these communities and how meaningful encounter with God is a central part of what is making this renaissance happen.
So, since you brought up Wexner, I was once in South Florida and on Shabbat for a Wexner conference, and I don't know if you know this, but most of the Haredi communities vacation in Miami Beach. It's very bizarre because in South Beach is not really a black hat community, and yet if you're looking for cholent, you can find it. So on Shabbat, one time when we were down there, we said, "Oh, we don't know where to go to shul. We'll follow some guys and see where it ends up." So we ended up in a house in South Beach that was full of Satmar Hasidim. As an aside, I'll say it's very wonderful to be here at JTS and the Minyanim being acknowledged by JTS. But I think one of the most unusual acknowledgments that Minyanim have experienced was when I was in the kitchen during that davening and talking to a guy. He says, "Where are you from?" From New York. Or where are you from? New York, Manhattan. Oh, Manhattan. Where do you daven in Manhattan? I said, "Why not? Hadar." He says, "I know it." He didn't know it. I'm telling you. So we had this davening experience, which was unlike many others that I've experienced, and we went back for Sudah Shlishit. This is in answer to your question about God. We went back for Sudah Shlishit, and in Sudah Shlishit, they were singing, and the Rebbe would start a melody, and they would pick up the melody. Everyone would sing it together, and all of a sudden, the lights turned off. I was sort of like, I know, I'm one of those guys who also once in a while his elbow bumps the light and you feel so embarrassed and the Rebbe's here. But it was actually, I found out later, it was on a timer. The lights went off and they continued this singing, and the singing just increased in intensity. So afterwards we asked one of the chassids that we befriended, why did the lights go out? And he said that the previous Rebbe had decreed that they should turn the lights off in the middle of the Tish because the dveikus, the intensity that the people were experiencing there was so high that they were having emotional experiences that were embarrassing for other people to see. And they could only fully experience their relationship with Hashem when the lights were out. I think that intense connection with God is one that you will not find every day in independent minyanim, but I think once in a while is something that we're striving for. And I think that when you talk about prayer is related to God. And I think that we don't necessarily give language to that, partially because we don't need to. I think it's a basic human instinct to strive for some connection. And I think that if someone had asked in the 80s, well, what's the next big young movement in Judaism going to be about? And someone said it's going to be about prayer, they would have been laughed out of the room. Why? What do you mean prayer? But I think it speaks to the enduring power of connecting to God. And we took a survey of the Minyanim. This is before we did a real survey with Stephen. But we were asking people. We wanted to know what was their experience of God. And instead of saying, "Do you believe in God?" Thumbs up, thumbs down. We said, "Do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? Are you leaning towards believing or not leaning towards believing?" And in those middle two categories, most people fell. I think that it's sort of significant that they're not willing to come out and say, I'm a Bible-thumping, God-believing Jew. At the same time, we're all going off to the woods on Shavuot and davening at 5 in. So there's something about divinity that's playing a role here. So I think that, by opening up the possibility of connecting to God, the Minyanim are speaking to a need that young people have, and all people have, I believe.
I think there's a lot of fear and a lot of shame in the progressive Jewish world about talking about God at all. When I was a rabbinical student, we definitely never learned how to talk about God to other people. And when I first started serving in various communities, I would avoid the topic at all costs. And it was a combination, I think, between coming from a progressive university where there was an attitude that God was a tool of the patriarchy, and coming from a rabbinical school where God was both non-intellectual and non-text-based and all kinds of things. And when I started actually talking to people about what they were seeking and realizing that this is a huge question for people and trying to find something to which to connect, and that not everyone is going to have the same relationship with the divine, and some people are going to struggle against any concept of God with great might, and that is their religious connection. And some people are deeply seeking a connection to God, and that is what they have come to Shul to look for, to not make assumptions about God being any one thing for a community, but to give people permission to have that conversation, to have those intense experiences, even with the lights on, and to kind of take away the shame around having that conversation and having that need to believe in something and to try to connect to something, I think is very, very powerful, and in it is great potential for connection.
I'm suspect here because of my personal belief. Not that I believe that there's no God, but I don't believe in God. I say that at the seminary. And all my Jewish life has been motivated by a strong ethnic, communal, secular connection marked by observance. So I'm suspect. And I say that in order to be skeptical of my own insights. Arnie, when you and I did The Jew Within, I remember our conclusions a little differently than yours now. What you and I said then was that and I remember we had a conversation with that psychologist, and we said we have these data, we have these quantitative data over here in which people said they believe in God. We have the qualitative data over there in which people roll their eyes. We ask them about God, they go, oh God. You remember that too? I mean, and you...
But my beliefs are also suspicious.
Then he was a researcher, now he's chancellor, I understand. We have different responsibilities. But I really do remember that. And I'm telling you, we've just done some qualitative research on returnees from birthright. I'll even credit her because it strengthens my case. It was done by Leora Skolnick, daughter of a very, very, as we know, JTS graduate, prominent, and herself a believing, observant person, wife of a rabbi. And in her work, I mean, she's not alone. People come back very excited about being Jewish, very excited about Israel, very excited about friends, very excited about Shabbat actually, and interested in Hebrew. And you listen, and you don't get God, and you don't get spirituality. And she is not alone. And then we did work also on quantitatively on spirituality, and the people who are spiritual are either Orthodox or they have a non-Jewish close relative, either a non-Jewish parent or a non-Jewish spouse. Hardly any people who are not Orthodox and are married and the children have been married see themselves as spiritually much, much lower than the American average. So I just want to say, it could be a very good thing that we respond to that growing market and we move it along. It's good. It could be good for the Jews. But let's not fool ourselves to thinking that there's a thirst in the land, not for hunger, not for, it's not true. Among Yidden today, our Yidden, there's not a big, I do not believe that there is a big widespread thirst for conversation and interest and study of God.
I interpret that data very differently.
Good.
When you say that those people have intense contact with people who are either Orthodox or not Jewish, those are two groups that don't have the same kind of shame about talking about God. If you've ever been in an African American church, there's this intensity, this amazing dvekut, this spiritual heights that are reached without that sense of self-consciousness? And am I, moving around too much? And am I singing too loudly? And am I saying the wrong thing? And I think that encountering that experience can give people a taste and can give people permission to want it. And I think Jews who haven't necessarily encountered those other kinds of environments, it doesn't even occur that that's allowed, that that's possible.
Just one last word I'll throw in on that, which is I think there's also a semantic problem, which is that I don't want to say God, I believe in God, the word God sort of gets caught in my throat, and I think when you're answering surveys about God, I'm also like, well, I don't know, but I've organized my life around something that the word God stands in for, and I think we haven't come up with a good word for discussing this aspect. And I think I don't have a solution for that, but I just note that it's also related to semantics. When you say people seeking meaning and purpose, that's also related to divinity, in my view. It doesn't have to be, but I think there's more overlap than the word God makes people feel comfortable saying.
I'm pro meaning and purpose.
So Ellie, do you, or have you, at the Minyan or at the yeshiva, had discussions, as I remember we had at Minyan Ma'at 25 years ago, about what people are doing when they engage in tefillah? Have they shared with each other the nature of their own kavanah?
Yeah, well, and here I would distinguish between the minyanim and the yeshiva. I think the minyanim are still set up as a place for people to come and experience a davening, but not necessarily have a rap session about it, as it were. The yeshiva is any yeshiva environment, which is essentially an immersive educational environment. Just to clarify, these are not. I once had a conversation for half an hour. The person thought I had built an institution for 4th grade Orthodox boys. So the yeshiva I'm talking about here is actually for college age and older men and women. And I think in that immersive educational environment, you have the opportunity to actually think about and talk about and study what does it mean to daven. Part of what I did in the book, it made me stick it in an appendix. I was trying to sneak it in as an actual chapter. Was an analysis of the first blessing of the Amida, which is basically trying to get at the question of what does it mean when I don't believe the words that are on the page of the Siddur? How can I ever daven if I don't like what I'm saying? And my strategy, which is Heschel's strategy, is to do a sympathetic exegesis, an interpretation that opens the words of davening. So I think those opportunities exist when you have a group of people who are devoting a certain amount of time to engage in general, Jewish enrichment. And I dare say that the people here in this room who are not spending 12 hours a day learning and davening and doing acts of chesed in an organized environment also have these conversations around your dinner table or at Kiddush once in a while, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk about davening.
Great. All right, I want to do one last question, then we'll turn the floor open to the audience. I want to just refer to the survey that Steve conducted, and appears on pages 63, 64, 65 of Empowered Judaism. So what are we to make of the following data, which interests me a lot? Of the attendees at Independent Minyanim that we surveyed, 46% grew up in a conservative synagogue, 20% in an Orthodox synagogue, 18% in a Reform synagogue. Currently, the largest percentage of minyan goers, about half, does not claim any denominational affiliation. Next datum. Minyan goers' top 2 reasons for being involved and to be part of a community are to be part of a community, 86%, and to participate in meaningful prayer, 85%. Next statistic. Minyan goers reflect a diverse spectrum of Jewish educational experience. But, and I editorialized, this is quite remarkable to me, 40% went to an elementary Jewish day school. 67% were part of a Jewish youth group. 65% went to Jewish summer camp. And 80% were involved in Hillel. Some 87% understand a simple Hebrew sentence. Steve, I'll start with you, and then we'll turn to Eli and Ayala to wrap up, and then we'll turn the floor open. What significance do these data have for the larger?
It was a study that Ellie and I and 2 others did as well. So it's Sean Landers and Michelle Shane and Ellie and I all did the survey. It's not just mine. So I'll just comment on two pieces of it really quickly. One is, well, you left out one, I think, equally important statistic. 52% have spent, this is your question, have spent 4 months or more in Israel.
Israel, I don't see
90+% had spent, of course they're going to Israel, but most of the Minyan members had lived in Israel at some point in their lives. That's huge. So you put all this together, and what it says is it also explains why there are Minyanim today. There are two prior developments. One is our parents, that generation, was very successful in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in expanding the infrastructure of Jewish education. Day schools especially, but camps, youth groups, not so much youth groups expansion. Certainly Hillel improved, Jewish studies proliferated on campus, and the opportunities to really engage with Israel in a very, very serious way. So that created the educated laity. When we talk about the intermarried, we talk about the married. 25% of the younger non-Orthodox generation is in-married, 25% is intermarried, and 50% are non-married. The biggest marital category among Jews 25 to 39 years old who are not Orthodox is non-married. Non-married, if they're fully trained, are going to be looking for a different experience. That's number one. Number two, the conservative movement, by and large, given its shape, has in effect been the primary fountainhead of the Minyanim, for good reason. If you're Orthodox, you stay Orthodox. If you reform, the truth is, and I'm channeling my teacher, Charles Liebman, who spent some years here. He said, they're not, overall, not that it has to be, not the rabbis, but they're overall, they're not all that committed, they're not all that well learned. So it's the conservative movement that has the most people that, on the one hand, are sufficiently learned, and on the other hand, weren't attached and weren't stuck to the movement. So today, the B'nai conservative are the generation that's doing a lot of this innovation, and therefore the challenge for the conservative movement is to reach out and construct a new Jewish center that will embrace conservative Jews, Minyanim Jews, and I would certainly hope as well, secular Jewish maximalists, and there are many of us as well.
Ellie, you want the last word here, or should we throw in?
I mean, I obviously haven't spent as much time with the data as the two of you have. One thing I would guess about that statistic is, definitely in terms of the conservative movement history, is in terms of definitely the way Hadar defines itself, but also I think a lot of the other independent minyanim, they expect or demand a level of fluency with traditional liturgy, with Hebrew, comfort with a very strong commitment to certain halachic interpretations, that you need to have the background from a certain place to feel comfortable and to feel like you're capable of becoming an insider in that environment. So I think that's part of why. I think, there's a larger question of why people who grew up in the conservative movement don't claim that identification anymore. And I think that has to do with a lot of things. I mean, I see that at CBST a lot. Why are so many people who grew up in the conservative movement members of a synagogue that's not affiliated with a movement? Partly because having, loved Camp Ramah or loved certain experiences of their shul, and then being told that they were not welcome to be fully part of communities because they were gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, doesn't make you not want to have the davening anymore. It doesn't make you not want to have that experience of community anymore, but you don't necessarily want to pay dues to a place that calls itself the name of the thing that pushed you out. And I think there are a lot of reasons for young people why affiliation and denominationalism isn't attractive, but the essential experiences still are. And I think that's what's being sought out in these minyanim.
I would just make 2 points. One is, I think, to challenge the assertion that Orthodox is its own bubble that has no forces of change. If they're Orthodox, they stay Orthodox. in the sense that when we see right before our eyes the whole debate about the left wing of Orthodoxy and whether or not to ordain a woman and what to call her, etc. I think that what we see in the minyanim, and I should say that of the minyanim that have been formed, a quarter of them, 25% of them, have a mechitza. They're not just, first of all, they don't look like Hadar, and they're not carbon copies of a conservative synagogue. I think what you're seeing is a movement in Orthodoxy to include more women participation, and that's something that's contributing to this force as well. It's actually the marrying of those two forces that gives some of this energy and the cross-pollination between those backgrounds. And the other thing I would say is that despite the incredibly rich background that a lot of people who come to the minyanim have, and I have to make this point clear, without those, we are, as I said in the beginning, we're standing on the shoulders of the investments and the giants that come before us, including the wise decision to make Jewish camps and Jewish day schools widely available, and Hillel revitalized, and making Israel something, a cultural norm to spend time in among a group of people. Nevertheless, I think this is critical to note, we would not be satisfied with a secular educational apparatus that stopped at 8th grade or at age 15 for camp. And I think that even though we have all these institutions there, they're not enough to create the literate, engaged Jewish community that we all want to see. They're necessary, but they're just the beginning. And I think that what our challenge is now is not to say, okay, what these institutions did got us that. It's those institutions plus a host of other institutions that cater to people as fully formed adults in their 20s, whatever you want to call it, fully formed, out of the single digits on the left-hand side of the number. Those are critical to determining what their Jewish lives will lead. So even if you go to day school, and even if you go to camp, and even if you went to a year in Israel in college, there's still a significant amount to do. That's what creating literate adults is about. We did it with college, and we haven't yet done it with Jewish education.
Great. So on that note, we'll throw the floor open to questions from the audience. Please speak as loud as you can, and you may find me repeating the question for the sake of the camera. Is this a question? Yes. Rabbi Pressman. It should not. Great question. So just to repeat it, how do the independent minyanim look at questions of governance? And as Danny put it at the end, how do we institutionalize a culture of innovation?
So very briefly, this weekend we had an amazing experience where we held a conference for independent minyanim, and we had 42 minyanim come. And 3 years ago, there were 11 minyanim that were coming. But more interestingly, on Sunday, we had a cross-pollination conference symposium with opened up to the entire Jewish world, but synagogues mainly coming. 29 synagogues and these 42 minyanim all went through a host of sessions, and one of the sessions was about governance. I think that it's not something that minyanim have figured out, although you'll see it described in the book about the ways in which Hadar had a particular governance system, and you'll see in some of the other minyan voices in the book how other minyanim have cut it. I think fundamentally, it's a smaller, leaner operation. It's just that simple. I mean, you look at the number of leaders in the minyan, in any given minyan, it's basically between 3 and 6 people. And I don't think there's yet one ritual committee, although I could be wrong. So I think fundamentally it's not a huge brainer. It's just a smaller number of people doing, in some ways, a lot of work. And I think that the threat to minyanim is how sustainable is it to have those 6 people doing all this work, and that's why committees get formed in the first place in larger institutions. But nevertheless, while they're young and when they get started, it's lean, mean.
Yes.
Hold on.
I just wanted to-
not so fast.
I just wanted to say, I think this is actually an area where it's important to cut Shoals some slack.
I was going to do that too. Is that what you,
I think that change is hard, and it's important to acknowledge that. And when there is an institution and there is a board, it's difficult to start something new. And that doesn't mean that we should embrace complacency. I think that it is absolutely possible for a long-established shul with an established board culture to start to change it and to start to heal it. And I think that that is a process that takes time and often requires help from outside resources, from consultants, from conferences, from bringing in new ideas. I think it's a big challenge. And you know, if a new rabbi comes into a shul and starts to change everything right away, that's going to be a disaster. If a new board president comes in and starts to change everything right away, that's going to be a disaster. It needs to be a process, and we do need to let it unfold. I think giving it the energy is extremely important, and acknowledging that that is sometimes going to be essential for the surviving and thriving of a shul. But I think it's okay that that is going to take a little bit longer in an existing institution.
And I just wanted to add, Larry Hoffman, Issa Aaron, Ari Kalman, and I are coming out with a book in which we did a qualitative analysis of what we call visionary versus functional congregations. And I can assure you, we found leadership that was innovative and reflective. That was the 2 words, as opposed to rote and routine. Not all the time, obviously, but that was. But it is. You don't have to be in an independent minyan to exercise innovative, reflective leadership. It does happen in suburban synagogues, and a key ingredient is the rabbi, who knows how to recruit reflective, innovative leadership and to do sufficient tzimtzum to allow that leadership to make decisions, to make successful decisions, and to make mistakes. So that's something we can learn from independent minyanim, but synagogues also have learned how to do this, not all the time, but there are enough instances where we know that this is true. Read the book.
I'll just repeat the question for the sake of the audience and the camera. How are the new independent minyanim different from the Chavurah movement, and how do we deal with the dynamic of intimacy versus largeness of participation?
I'll tell you, writing a book is a horrible, horrible process. One good benefit about it is that I get to say, I wrote about that in the book. I would encourage you to read it because it was more thought out then when I put it down in words here. But I would just say very briefly, I make the argument that in some ways I don't see us different from the Chavurah movement much in the way. And if you read the introduction by Jonathan Sarno, professor of history at Brandeis, basically traces the historical development of innovative startups in American Jewish history from the early 1800s. And what I was seeing is that I don't think, in some ways, we're not different from the Chavurah movement, because the Chavurah movement is, in some ways, true to what Judaism organized always, in the sense that it was never sort of a massive building with people who, showed up, in certain selected life cycle moments, but one in which it was small communities, et cetera. I think that there's a lot of stylistic differences between the Minyanim and the Chavurah movement, both in terms of the engagement with Torah discussion, let's say, and the liturgy editing. In this conference we had this weekend, one of the people who was presenting was a Reconstructionist rabbi. She was floored that basically none of the minyanim are using anything but a traditional Birnbaum Siddur liturgy. Ishei Yisrael is back. We're talking in the future tense. So, that to her was shocking and obviously very different from the Chavurah movement. So I think a lot of those local changes are different, which you can read about more in the book.
So what we're going to do now is take 3 questions and then throw them to the panel, and then we'll have to close. Yes, sir. Yes. So how are we going to survive without anti-Semitism and without the ghetto? Okay, thank you. Next question. On the side, I've been ignoring yes in the back. Yael. Good question. Now let me look in this direction. Is there a question over here? Yes, sir.
Suppose your vision of empowered later Judaism became the norm. What would be the implication of how you train the next generation of rabbis and cantors, which you just closed in the rabbinical schools?
Great last question. Rabbi Cohen first. Should we close down the rabbinical school?
First of all, I'm glad Yael asked that question, and also to acknowledge the fact that Hadar, as the Minyan, remains a volunteer-led organization. I've been out of the leadership there since 2005, already almost 5 years, and it's been led by a whole host of young and enthusiastic and visionary people. To answer the question about building bridges with members of synagogues, it's interesting. I'm now a member of a synagogue. I'll come clean. And I live up in Washington Heights, got priced out of Upper West Side, had a baby, that's how it happened. And, the synagogue is a wonderful, it's a wonderful synagogue in a neighborhood that's drawing in people who are alumni, as it were, of independent minyanim, as well as the multi-generational ethos of any 80-year-old synagogue. And while there's certainly challenges in moving that institution forward, there's a lot of energy and excitement there. And I think that, part of the bridges that are going to be built are the natural bridges that happen when people move out of the very, very highly urban areas and move to other areas. Either they're going to start a minyan within a shul, like the folks in Teaneck did, modeled on the minyan that they were at previously, or there will be an active, good member of their shul that's going to push the shul in certain directions, and I think not in a bombastic way or a we know everything way, but in having seen other models, we'll bring that to the synagogue. So I think that part of the bridge building will happen naturally. In terms of training rabbis and cantors, I think that, and I want to make this also very clear, the language of empowered Judaism is one in which I believe that people can be empowered, and that's important and necessary. But it doesn't mean that, empowerment doesn't mean now I get to do whatever I want. I'm the ultimate authority. Empowerment means I have some basis to do something because I'm acting from a place of knowledge and skill. And I think that rabbis and the training of rabbis, if in the old model, the rabbi was the Jew for me, right? The rabbi is going to be the one who's going to reflect my Jewish identity. I have no ownership of it. I'm generalizing here, obviously. In the new model, the rabbi, which is really the older model, the rabbi is the teacher. The rabbi is the guide. Once you're engaged and invested in creating a Jewish life that you can take hold of from yourself, you can't do that by yourself. You need someone who's going to guide you and teach you, like any good thing that you find valuable. And I think Cantor's the same way. Cantor isn't someone who davens for me. Cantor is somebody who teaches me how to daven, who draws me in. And I think that will have significant changes in terms of how you train those clergy members. But we desperately need critical, good leadership in rabbis and shlichei tzibor.
I think I'm going to end on that wonderful note for JTS and its future. I want to thank our panel, thank Eli Cohen and thank all of you for being here.